Welcome to our roundtable hosted by BHDY Florida. We are grateful for your participation and are looking forward to hearing insights from our amazing guest speakers regarding the opportunities and challenges for blockchain deployments in the healthcare system. I would like to also extend our gratitude to Tori Senai for her visionary leadership and support. And now, please allow me to introduce our guest speakers for today. John Buss, he's the CEO and founder of Hashed Health. Welcome, John.
And so our mission in life is to create new startups that solve foundational healthcare technology challenges. We've everything we do has a blockchain or distributed ledger component to it. It's part of the stack that we use to solve for trust and transparency and incentive alignment challenges across a number of use cases. And so we are most widely known for a credentialing platform, and a kind of a new business model for credentialing called Professional Credentials Exchange, that was spun out last year and is in production and is successful. And we're very proud of the work that we've done there. And we are now in the process of standing up a few more companies, at least one of which will probably be announced and spun out of Hashed Health this year. And then we've got a few more that we expect to spin out next year. And we're tremendously excited about where the market is. We feel like the technology is maturing and the use cases available to solve problems is also widening, and it's a really exciting time to be in the space.
Rama Rao, he's the CEO and co-founder of Bloqcube. Welcome, Rama.
Thanks, John, and greetings, everyone. My background is coming from the pharma industry, where I spent 27, 28 years at Eli Lilly and Novartis in multiple roles all over the world, and now based out of Piscataway and Bridgewater, New Jersey. Our focus from the end-use perspective is in the area of clinical trials, specifically clinical trial operations. And what we're really trying to do is to say something simple, that this is an area that is ripe for change. The pandemic has demonstrated that. And what we're really trying to do is focus on clinical trial operations, take out the inefficiencies using a blockchain-driven stack. We're using Hyperledger Fabric. And we have just launched a commercial version. This is our fourth version, a commercial version that we're taking to customers, which is FDA compliant, etc. And our intent really is to speed up clinical trials. Our mission is to get drugs to patients faster. And as the whole situation with vaccines has shown, there's not a moment to be lost to make that happen. And we strongly believe that blockchain-driven systems have a key role to play. And I'll talk about that later. Thanks.
This is Trey Rutledge. He's a Dragonchain Director of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships. Thank you, Trey, and welcome.
Sure, yeah. I've been with Dragonchain a little bit over 3.5 years now. And our focus is really just finding channel partners and, helping to establish in the enterprise space, networking and collaborations where we're building, POCs and developing pilots that, explore the functionality and the features that blockchain can bring to the healthcare arena.
Let's begin with our first questions to commence our discussion. And I would like to start with hearing John's opinion on the major opportunities for blockchain in the post-pandemic era in the US and outside the US, those that continue as unresolved and those new more recently presented.
Sure, John. Having been in the space for, I guess going on 4.5 years or so now, we are starting to get a real sense for the design patterns that represent near-term use cases. And those are both technical and business, and also some governance design patterns as well, I guess. I think our first real win was using a distributed ledger framework to create a new business model for credentialing. So instead of the traditional model of kind of manually verifying credentials, in the basement of a hospital in a process that takes 4 to 6 months, what we allowed organizations to do and are allowing organizations to do is to curate that information and then share it with others in a way that's trusted. And that opens up this opportunity to kind of create a data market or a data exchange for primary source verified credentials. And so that's, in our kind of thinking, that's this idea of an asset exchange. Not so different than a lot of the asset exchanges that exist in the blockchain space, but instead of moving cryptocurrency on the ledger, you're trading or transacting around these primary source verified credentials. And so we love use cases where we kind of take that idea of a digital asset and expand it to interesting kind of assets in healthcare. Going forward, we're using a similar design pattern on a number of use cases in supply chain and other kind of tokenized digital assets. It's actually, very little about the technology itself. It's more about a new way to solve an old problem that's kind of critically kind of painful to the healthcare space. And a lot of these multi-party, multi-system challenges are directly kind of direct factors in the cost of care. And so we're seeing kind of the aperture widening in terms of interest in the technology and interested in the use cases that we are exploring. I think supply chain, you've seen MetaLedger as a successful platform in the kind of the pharma track and trace space. I think that's a great use case and success story. I think there are other supply chain use cases beyond just track and trace that are also really interesting. And so we're doing some active work there, and we expect one of our near-term commercialization opportunities to sit in the supply chain world. And then we also are very interested in kind of fintech for healthcare. The idea of moving money based off of a shared ledger for clinical and business and real world data is very attractive to us, and is another area where we expect to see some commercialization activities over the next year. So those are a couple examples.
Thank you, John. Those are wonderful examples. Rama, what are your thoughts?
Has basically shuffled the deck of cards the way we see it. Just to give you an idea, if a year back when I would try to talk to people, I'd get about 3 or 4 leads. Now we've got about 14 to 16 because the industry knows that digital transformation is a necessity and we have to do it. So that's the first observation I would have there. The second observation is that there is a greater awareness towards decentralization than what was there before. So much so, for example, in December, in clinical trials specifically, there was what is called a Decentralized Clinical Trials Association form, which has got all the who's who, but we are not there. So there is that momentum in terms of strategic thought. And third thing is, there's a much larger degree of collaborative enterprise and not just the classic competitive enterprise. Now, obviously, competition will be an element of it in the solutioning, but specifically in a more strategic sense. So those are what I would describe as 3 macro kind of moves. And very frankly, everybody has seen, nobody knew clinical trials before we heard about vaccines. And now anybody who talks about vaccines knows about clinical trials. So we have been focused, just like John, 4 years back, we set up, we actually amongst the earliest to use Hyperledger Fabric version 0.6 in our POC. And we've been razor focused on that. But our focus has not been because of the just pure operational processes, but how to create an integrative process that will help or leverage the power of the blockchain. The single source of truth, data immutability, blah, 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 So The approach that the pandemic is forcing people to do is to rethink that, because patients and sites cannot be exposed to the infection that the virus or anything of that sort can create. So the very fact of creating patient-centric process is accelerating or catalyzing a decentralized kind of approach. Now, then the other parts from a tactical perspective, and building also a little bit on what John has said, which is what we have done in our system 4 years back, and now we've got a patent pending for it, is to again micro transact, all the elements. So if you look at systems for clinical trials, they tend to be very batch oriented, data structures, data lakes, then BI, et cetera, et cetera. But the beauty of a blockchain-based system, which the pandemic is forcing us to look at, is to work at a transactional level. And so we can create transactional level efficiencies that can get scale up. Look, when I entered the pharma industry about 25, 28 years back, the cost of building a drug and taking to market was about $250 odd million. Now it's $2.5, $2.6 billion. And this is not sustainable. So the pandemic has really causing us to focus on how we can operationally make that more efficient. Because if somebody says, I've got a vaccine that costs $1 million, nobody's going to touch it. And once we get past COVID and look at cancer vaccine, et cetera, we have to look at efficiencies. The last part of it is a greater degree of participatory, I would say, healthcare. And what I mean by participatory is, whether it's in clinical trials where patients record their behaviors and their outcomes, whether it is the digital transformation using apps to figure out what is happening, or even as I saw, there was one startup team that I met who basically tracks the cough that somebody generates onto their iPhone, and from there discerns whether it is a COVID cough or not. So it's that diagnostic elements being made more decentralized and being given on an app to a patient that is causing another revolution in this area. So that's what I would say from the macro to the micro, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Trey, what has been your experience?
I think that COVID has really accelerated the process, definitely. I think supply chain has come to the forefront, line of sight, authentication. We're seeing some really unique applications in the space with even incorporating NFTs and smart contracts and embedding payments and getting really creative with the use of the technology. But we're also seeing an application right now in telehealth, using that ability to end fraud and timestamp, watermark, getting geofactors that prove that the event occurred. I think that is another application where we're seeing a lot of traction of late. But just, when you look at the healthcare arena itself with all the disparate and siloed networks, I think just being able to come in and allow intercommunication there is a big piece that's been missing. So, us having the US patent on interoperability, I think that's getting some doors open for us. And then when you look at the complexity science of being able to predict out, 6 to 9 months out with 90% accuracy of what's going to be needed for inventory, and then creating that line of sight, I think there's a lot of value there as well.
All right, and now we will move to our second topic. What are the major opportunities in the post-pandemic and Delta era, John?
The major opportunities in the post-pandemic era. Well, I think we touched on some of this a few minutes ago, but I do believe that the crisis has really accelerated a lot of the trends that were kind of unfolding more slowly pre-pandemic. And so I think Trey mentioned telehealth and telemedicine. I think, Trey and I both talked a little bit about supply chain. You can talk about, real world data is becoming more and more important. As Julie Yu from A16Z would say, the center of gravity for data is shifting from the traditional systems of record to kind of the environmental or the non-traditional systems of record. And so there's a real need for data security, data pedigree, data ownership as the sources of data move from the clinical setting to the real world setting to the patient. So patient control over their data and patient incentivization for data and incentivization for compliance to protocols as they're cared for in a non-clinical setting and move through their episodes largely outside of a clinical setting becomes more and more important. And so, anytime you see at least the indicators of a potential blockchain or distributed ledger solution, and I think there's a difference between blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. Anytime you see a multi-party, multi-system process or solution where there's the need for shared incentives and transparency and alignment and trust across that network in terms of the data that's being collected and how it's being used, could represent an opportunity for a blockchain or a distributed ledger solution. If you can bring together the network and if you can create a viable business model that encourages participation and adoption. And so, we're getting to a point where the technical solutions are there. It is totally feasible to build these solutions and to deploy them and to even scale them up. What is often harder are creating these utility business models and creating the governance structures that help you scale up kind of the non-technical part of that solution and make sure that all the critical members of the network are incentivized to participate. And so that alignment is oftentimes really challenging for these types of networks as well. And so again, I think we're finding in supply chain and in some payments use cases and in some other, Rama's focused on clinical trials. I think there are great opportunities around decentralized clinical trials. So I think he's on to kind of tapping into a rich vein there. There are areas that we're finding after years of kind of experimenting where we're starting to find product market fit for the technical business and governance structures that are necessary to put in place to run these networks. So I think that's why the future looks bright in terms of the second half of 2021 and 2022. I think we can build on top of the successes of ProCredX and MetaLedger, what Avenir Health is doing, what Synaptic kind of demonstrated, some of the things that Burst IQ is doing. These are examples of real innovative products that are being brought to market or have been brought to market and are proven to solve real problems. And I think that's something that we struggled to talk about a year ago.
Thank you, John. Rama, some other major opportunities?
Yeah, I think John has really given a beautiful summary. I think what I would only add to that is a couple of things, which I alluded to, is making the patient at the center of the discourse and moving a little away from the institutional framework that existed before. We've got the payers, we've got the hospitals and what have you, it's all institutionalized. And now once we start moving to digital apps or digital recording of data or patient-centric recording of data, that makes a huge change. And that's really the way in building on John's point about real-world evidence. Because, for example, just today I read a report saying they really don't have much data about how the vaccine is doing with the Delta variant. And if you had our systems in which we could gather all that data very rapidly, imagine how much faster science and patients would be benefited by that. So that's the first thing, the patient centricity. The second thing also is it alludes to why we are focusing on clinical trial is the operational inefficiencies. There is, of course, a case to be made not to use blockchain in many areas, but there's a case also to be made the distributed ledger aspect of blockchain that is going to give even more power. And that builds on John's point about the the way in which organizations can collaborate. So for example, in Europe, there is the pharma companies have all come together and they're working on supply chain pieces for ensuring medicines are not counterfeit and supply chain of pharmaceutical ingredients are all okay. And as pharmaceutical products become high value, low volume kind of things, the provenancing, digital certification, et cetera, become even more important. So things like what PharmaLedger, RhymeID, et cetera, are doing is fabulous from that perspective. The third part, what we have not really built into place really is cross-border data sharing opportunities. At some stage, if, for example, Israel has the biggest database potentially of vaccine effectiveness, how do we access that by keeping the patient privacy and all those parameters in place? But how do researchers access it? So that's what I call cross-border. And I think the blockchain is a great kind of technology platform to manage those sort of processes. And the last thing is that I would argue is the data integrity issue. Last year, for example, there were some physicians who published data on a clinical trial with hydroxychloroquine, which had to be retracted, for data integrity issues. So I would assert that the data integrity issue is not a small issue, but our blockchain-based or a distributed ledger engine allows us to improve the governance and enhance it across over here. The challenge and the risk that are there is there are a plethora of protocols, which protocol or which group of protocols need to be used, and then which protocol needs to be used for behavioral modification. Because at the end, we need to accept this is a risk-averse industry, and rightly so. So that is one of the challenges. And the second challenge that also comes together, which I think is not insurmountable, is at some stage, when we start getting into transactional record processing efficiencies, while we may not meet the levels that are there in a credit card kind of situation, we still will have some challenges in our case because healthcare data is not just pure numbers. There are MRI that have to be exchanged, or a fMRI or a CAT scan, et cetera. How do we build the technology to manage that process also so the data repository as a whole can be efficient? Those are some of my thoughts over here.
Thank you, Rama. Trey, do you have any insights for these major opportunities?
I think we've covered most of the opportunities, and they're plentiful, I believe. And, there's a lot of different areas within healthcare that blockchain can help. But as John alluded to earlier, I think getting engagement, incentivizing people is a big piece. And then also, I think when you have so many different networks you're trying to connect and doing cross-border payment, I think it goes back to that back-end interoperability. I think that's been a rate limiting thing for a lot of companies. Even if you look at Cerner, who recently lost that VA contract, the reason for that was that they did not have the back-end interoperability needed to pull that kind of operation off. So I think it goes back to the features and functionality of the architecture of whatever you choose to employ in healthcare. And I think that you got to look at some of the major issues that have kept others away from the industry, like scalability, making sure that whatever you choose is going to be able to handle that workload, handle that transactional load. That's a big piece. Going back to the patient-centered care, we have a decentralized identity called Factor that actually is GDPR, CCPA capable, that does allow that patient to keep their data. And I think that is a big shift from this metadata collecting to empowering the patient. I love to see that occurring, and I think that with that, you're going to have the identity connected to a blockchain that actually can pull off the complexity science, of all something large and with so many disparate and siloed networks, whether you're just talking within one hospital or if you're talking about connecting, border to border payments, electronic healthcare records, sharing that in a permission way, GDPR compliant. That is a big feat in itself. But that's something that we've been able to accomplish at Dragonchain, and hopefully something that will continue to get more traction with.
Let's move on now. I am certain our audience would like to hear your thoughts on how your company is maintaining a competitive edge in this dynamic environment. John.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you've seen a lot of companies come and go since 2016 when we started Hashed. I believe that we and it's not just Hash, it's the other kind of early pioneers in the space, Rama being one of them. We've been developing a new market since 2016. And in my mind, the reason Hash Health has unfolded successfully the way it has been our ability to stay as agnostic as possible to technology and business and governance and network and use case. So we started off in 2016, 2017 by doing a lot of advisory work and education and speaking and writing and ideation with the industry in a very open and public way. It was not about Hash. It was about the industry coming together and learning together. And that's why we started Distributed Health Conference and all, did a lot of the things that we did in 2016, 2017. And those learnings and those experiments led to a lot of relationships between Hash and pharma and insurance companies and other technology companies, entrepreneurs, other thought leaders in the healthcare blockchain space, and also the different protocols. We built in 16 and 17 on probably six or so different protocols. And so we got a good sense, in the early years of what was real and what wasn't, and who's doing what, and what use cases are pharma companies interested in, insurance companies interested in, the health systems interested in. And so, in 17 and 18, those conversations started to mature past just experimentation towards products and kind of pilots and potentially commercial opportunities. We started to recognize design patterns across all of the conversations that we were having, both technical and business design patterns. And then in 2019, a few of those experiments turned into networks. We started kind of gathering customers around things like professional credentials exchange. We started associating ourselves with other network members, co-founders, and customers who were excited to see that come to life. And so we spun out ProCredX once we had a product, and once we had customers, and once we had investors, and once we had a good co-founding team who was going to run that company. And we also have some technical experience around what's really working. And now we're taking that and applying it to other use cases, other startup opportunities. And so that's a long answer to what I think our secret to success, and what I would recommend to anyone who wants to listen, is that this market is developing really quickly, and the technical models and the business models and the networks are developing really quickly. And COVID has accelerated interest in these kind of utility structures, these kind of market level data layers upon which you can build new and innovative technologies and business models. And so, the key is to stay as flexible and agnostic as possible, and make things look familiar to your customers. Don't talk about blockchain. Talk about the problem you're solving, and go to where the low-hanging fruit is. I think you got to kind of build bridges in our world, and you got to help people, lead them to water, and then help them recognize value early, and then build towards the beautiful decentralized future over time. Oftentimes, if you lead with blockchain and decentralization and crypto, it's just a bridge too far for the people that you need to adopt your solutions to make it there. And so a lot of the things that people were talking about in 2016, 2017, it's not that those were bad use cases. Those are great use cases. It's just that it was really hard to assemble the network and kind of create a business model and scale the technology that was necessary to solve those problems sometimes. And so, finding where the low-hanging fruit is has been the key for us, and staying very flexible and kind of going to where the market leads us has been a really important part of our success thus far.
Thank you, John. Rama, your thoughts?
Yeah, firstly, John has been such an inspiration in this field. And so since I met him 4 years back, and the points that he made then were also very similar, that let's not talk about blockchain, let's talk about the benefits we give to our customers. And frankly, today's the day I talk about blockchain, but when I talk to a customer, blockchain is the last thing that I bring into the equation. What I try to talk about very specifically is that what are your pain points? What are you missing with today's technology solutions, and how can we help? So that's, I think, specifically in the area that I operate, which is in clinical trials with biopharma CROs, a very critical piece of advice that John gave me also some time back, and we have implemented. The second thing is that there are certain areas where the industry is also, specifically the pharma industry, has realized the end user case is so apparent, and supply chain management on blockchain is one of them. And I think the panelists have talked about it. So we, as from a competitive edge perspective, have not directly dived into that. We try to stick to our knitting with a laser-like focus, and to say that let's not talk about running a New York marathon if we can't run the next 100 yards. So our whole focus has been basic stuff which tackle basic problems and give credibility to all the players in it. So that's the second part. The third part also is, at the same time, because CIOs and their staff are reading about all these areas, what is it that we can customize from existing technology to make an impact in that area? So for example, we are looking very specifically at track and trace in clinical trials, and we'll have a POC ready in the next couple of months, which we'll integrate onto our platform. The fourth part also is, I think sometimes it gets missed in all this debate, that the beauty of a distributed ledger with a single source of data is the possibility of giving multiple capabilities on a unified platform. If tomorrow we were to just replace the siloed and fractional systems which are running on centralized data ledgers and replace it by decentralized data ledgers, we may think we have gone a big distance, but it's quite likely in the eyes of our customer, that's not earth-shattering enough for them to take the risk of changing everything over. Because as you can imagine, changing software and systems is a fairly larger piece. I think the last bit of competitive edge that we need to sort of really think through, and we are trying to do it also, but it's again a little far ahead. And I shouldn't say the second last piece, I'd say. The last piece will be interoperability. The second last piece is to sit back and look at the aspects of patient data exchange. And John has alluded to that. It's not just a layering of data that is creating a monetizability as well as an efficiency, but also what is it that people can grasp right away, as part of the process. So for example, if today I can participate in a trial and speed it up, if I'm going to get paid after 4 months or 2 years, why would I want to participate? That goes back to the points being made by Trey and John to some of the financial payments. And we've also brought out a pretty strong payment engine for which we've got a patent pending to keep our competitive edge. The last thing, which is a little more complex and a little more difficult, is the interoperability feature. And I look at interoperability in 2 areas. One, which is, let's say, patient records, and the second is interoperability of systems. I talked a little bit earlier about the different protocols, and everybody will think that their protocol is the best. But an organization, for example, has standardized on Microsoft Office Pack, for example, for years, or something of that nature. And the debate is, do I use an Apple system or a Windows system? So also, I suspect that there'll be some degree of either coalescing around a protocol, and Hyperledger Fabric is being used in the pharma industry for supply chain, or there would be something where we create an interoperability bridge, the way Hyperledger and Ethereum are collaborating to create that interoperability framework. And that is, I would argue, is the most critical part in order to accelerate not in an evolutionary way, but in a revolutionary way, the usage of distributed ledger and blockchain engines to give everybody and our patients a competitive benefit.
Trey, we would like to hear your insights as well.
Sure. I think as what we're doing to stay competitive is, the IP itself, I think, is a huge piece. And we have a number of US Holy Grail patents that we kind of hang our hat on. So, we have the US smart contract orchestration patent. So that's a web-based RESTful architecture that's really flexible and interoperable, and you're able to go back into your data and look at inputs and outputs and go back in time. I think that if you look at the VA, they've got 70 things on their checklist of what they want to do, and smart contract orchestration is at the top of that list. So I think that you're going to see, a continued interest in that. And then also back to the interoperability piece, we do have the US patent on interoperability, and that does handle electronic healthcare records or connecting systems. So I think you're going to continue to see people know that has a lot of value. If you're going to operate in the US, you might as well work with someone that has that patent. Then we go back to that incentivization, that we keep referring to. We have the US patent on a loyalty and rewards, that system that actually uses an algorithm that you can use internally to incentivize efficiency within the hospital. You can turn that outward towards your client or your patient. And I think that ways to incentivize and reward behavior, obviously, whether that's at a clinical trial or getting someone to, register or take their medicine, has tremendous value. But I think you also have to look at, the carbon footprint as we're talking about putting things on chain. I think you're going to see continued focus on how much of a footprint you have in that process. And we have an extremely low carbon footprint. It's nearly net zero. We use 0.02 watts per transaction. We don't have any mining rigs associated with our platform. So I think you're going to see that win out as you're looking at someone with similar features. That lower carbon footprint, I think, is going to be a unique value proposition. And then I think we go back to scalability, being able to have something that can handle, 50 billion transactions a day plus, is you're going to have an ecosystem that can handle that when you start looking at larger networks and connecting cross-border networks. But then I think also, pricing, having a deterministic and stable pricing that's not going to move based on network activity. I think that's going to be really important to enterprise because, having waivers in your costs really is something that you can't incur. And I think the last piece that's really a unique value proposition for us is the security. So we have a 5-layer quantum resistant mechanism, but we also have a quantum encrypted. We use a polymorphic random number generator that we've actually incorporated into our core. So as opposed to an AES 256, we're north of 10,000, AES 10,000 plus. So I think looking forward as quantum computing continues to grow orders of magnitude, having that security to protect that IP is really going to become paramount in the future.
Thank you, Trey. For our last round, please, John, would you share one of your exciting upcoming projects?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I've got we're trying to commercialize 2 different companies right now. One of them is actually in a production state, and the other one's getting funded right now, and neither one of them have been made public yet. And so I as much as I love what you and Tori do, I don't know if I'm at liberty to kind of announce them on this podcast. I would say that we're very excited about kind of the design pattern that we proved with Professional Credentials Exchange. We also are building our first kind of Ethereum focused solution, so true blockchain, and we've been kind of Hash Health, and a lot of the companies in the healthcare space have been living in the kind of the DLT world for a while, because when you architected something a couple of years ago, you really needed to be able to handle privacy and security and throughput and confidentiality and PHI diligently. And so that, at least to us, was a little bit of a challenge over the last few years. And I think the technology has matured a lot and is continuing to evolve very quickly to support some of those types of use cases with those types of requirements and optimizations on a more decentralized kind of platform. So I think we're excited about those advances. You know, there's the other thing that I'll mention that we're very interested in is kind of this idea of programmable value transfer, and I think that's probably a big focus area for us going into 2022, and the use of kind of data from the non-clinical setting and how to use that to support payment models and reimbursement structures and free the world from a lot of the poorly designed incentivization structures that exist in our contracting functions and reimbursement functions today. So those are a couple of areas of focus for Hash going into next year.
And we are thankful for you to share, John. Thank you. Rama, some of those exciting projects.
For me, the simple thing is that our commercial product is being rolled out. It's FDA Part 11 compliant, etc. And we are right now totally focused on customer acquisition. We only talk about blockchain to the IT folks, and otherwise we just talk about the benefits that we can deliver. We had a pilot early last year, and we basically, there was in a very difficult setting in rural India, they were doing an observational diabetes study, and the data is not fully published, so I can't give all the details, but the protocol had 850 patients whose data had to be gathered in 12 months. And using our system, we were able to gather for 150 patients the data in 12 days. So we really cut through some of the operational issues that were there. So we're very excited about taking this product now to mid-sized biotech, CROs, etc., and pharma companies. And simultaneously, we have got some other endeavors in the hopper, which until the POC comes through and demonstrates it, I'm a little reluctant to share. But fundamentally, I think there is a greater awareness of the benefits of the technology that we have developed. And we just want to be laser focused on getting a customer and not a customer, and then get a pipeline of customers after that, and basically showing how efficient it is going forward.
Trey, what about your projects?
You know, a lot of the stuff that we're working on right now is actually NDA. You know, we recently were put on the GSA schedule in the Department of Defense as the sole vendor for quantum encrypted blockchain and quantum encrypted smart contracts. So that's opened the door for us to a lot of the three-letter agencies. And unfortunately, I'm not, allowed to speak about those, but we do have quite a few projects that are, compound to consumption type tracking. A lot of stuff within supply chain, and then also again telehealth, and we're doing some stuff outside of the country as well that will be announced here pretty soon. So I wish I could say more, but a lot of really interesting projects that are really large in scope.
Thank you, Trey. Thank you, everyone, and this concludes our event today. Thank you to our audience and guest speakers and our BHDY founder, Tori Senai. I'm sure we'll see you again virtually very soon. Thank you, everyone.